Seeing none. Oh, perfect. Seeing none, I'd call for a motion to approve the agenda as circulated. Jim, seconded. Any opposed? Great. And review meeting minutes. If everyone had a chance to review the meetings from our minutes from our June 2nd meeting, were there any changes to be made there? I don't think so. They were circulated ahead of time. So I'd call for a motion to approve the minutes from June. From someone, anyone?
Am I allowed to?
Moved and seconded. Yeah, great. Thank you. Any opposed? Awesome. Matters arising from previous minutes. We don't have anything there, so we're just going to move right on to new business and get into it. So we'll just turn it right over to our consultants, Sierra Planning. We have an update, site evaluation criteria, and an updated list of potential sites to go through today. Who'd like to take that one? Is it John or Calvin?
John.
Okay.
Sorry, I just stepped away to the printer just to grab a copy of the agenda. Just give me 10 seconds.
Sure.
Even better, that was 2 seconds. Okay. Update discussion with Moti. So we have 3 items that we want to discuss, and just welcome Myers as well to the meeting. And first is an update of discussions that we had with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure regarding what is generally considered to be the preferred site. In terms of the second item, site evaluation criteria and an updated list of potential sites that we want to discuss, and that's material that had been sent out to you. Just give me one more moment just to grab the file on the discussions with Moti, and I will be right back. I'm usually a lot more organized, so I apologize. So we, I would invite those that were in the meeting, you know, Mike and Gerald and Carol to comment as I go through. So I'll just sort of read out what we had. So as a result of the last committee meeting, we decided to, it would be very important for us to really find out the preferred site. And maybe, Cal, as we do that, I don't know whether you have the sites that you want to put up on screen, just so we can.
I don't have it handy, but I'll get it.
Well, I have it, so why don't I do that? Where are we? Just 1 second, sorry. Let me just bring it back up 1 second.
John, are you pulling up what we sent you yesterday with the added page with the
Yeah,
site?
that's what I'm just doing here. So let me now share the screen.
And I have it in case you need to pull off and you want me to share
Sure.
next.
So hopefully everyone can see that now. So South Okanagan Aquatic Center. So I'm just gonna scroll down to the particular site that we are talking, which is number 6. We're going to come back and through and look at these sites again, just in a discussion format shortly, but just to describe what we discussed with the ministry is helpful. So here we are. Not that this site needs any introduction, but we as a result of the committee meeting, we had to really find out what is the site, what are the boundaries of the site for our purposes, and for planning, because you can see it's part roadway. There's a lay-by there. It's Fruit Vale Way in terms of access to some of the farmlands. There's a ridge there. We've understood some of the zoning implications of the lands. Currently sort of parkland recreation in terms of designation, and then there's some environmental lands on the north side. So what we wanted to be able to do is have a discussion with the ministry on what land is it that you're looking to possibly make surplus, and then secondly, what is the process and what's required in order for this to actually happen. So we met with Jeff Wiseman, and he confirmed a couple of things. Firstly, that they're very much interested in sticking to what he had discussed with the municipal officials, some of whom are on the call here today, 3 or 4 years ago, and time has flown by, so they haven't done anything since then. But just to give everyone some clarity to it, the proposition is that the OIB would be the buyer from the Crown, and the Crown is separate from the ministry, and so there is a bit of a process that would need to be followed. The upshot of that is, though, that subsequent to this meeting today and getting your input, we're going to issue a note back to the Ministry of Transportation indicating our interest in this site and itemizing timelines and time being of the essence, all of that good stuff. And then Jeff Wiseman at the ministry will then start to work through the internal process to make some decision making on the site. So at the moment, all the intentions are, yes, the site is surplus and can be provided, but what is the process and the timeline and some of the background information that we need. So we know that it's an old wayside gravel pit. He referred to it as the graveyard pit. I'm sure some people are fully aware of that. It's been used, it's been depleted, and it has been reclaimed. There is, however, a gravel reserve still on it, and that is a designation that would need to be dealt with. So the site itself, as a piece of Crown land, means we have to deal with the province as a whole, and that's the BC Transportation Financing Authority. But it is considered surplus for their purposes, which is the main hurdle that needs to be set in place for it to be released. We did discuss, and maybe Cal, as I'm talking here, you can remind yourself that we did have a discussion with Jeff about the importance of certain intersections. There's an intersection to the north, to the northwest as you look at the screen here, and there's the intersection obviously to the south east. They have a preference for limiting the number of intersections on any major road anyway, because they're points of conflict. And so we did talk about some possibilities for site planning where you would close one of these accesses, probably the one to the southeast. Interestingly, the right-of-way itself, as you can see there, the design that Cal has put there in terms of footprint, pushes into the right-of-way. There are a couple of sites, if you can look at the screen, you can see a very thin black boundary line, and those are the property boundaries. So on the roadway side, that's a linear parcel that is a right-of-way jurisdiction for the ministry itself. They own the right-of-way. So we're dealing with, effectively, from a technical point of view, 2 landowners. But the message that we got from them is they're open to consideration of how you deal with that right-of-way parcel, which is a fairly significant piece as it relates to where Cal has shown that design right now, where the lay-by is, what I refer to as the lay-by. And that would need to be dealt through. So they're open for discussion on it. Any changes to the right-of-way, though, intersection changes and so forth, that would be a project cost that would be borne by the developer, so borne by this project. as opposed to them doing it out of the goodness of their hearts or being instructed to by the province. So you know, there is something that we need to go through. If you build on this site, normal planning procedure would be in place. There would need to be a traffic impact assessment of some significance to make sure that everything worked. But you know, this was a positive conversation with Jeff, so we want to write back to him and say, you know, thumbs up, we're interested. What do you now need from us, beside the feasibility study, which would give the siting of this, to move this forward? So maybe I'll stop there and just ask if Cal, Gerald, Michael, Carol have any comments that you want to add to what I've just indicated.
I'm not sure if I missed it in the first part, John, but I think the one thing action item we did propose to MOTI was that they immediately start the process to decommission the pit, and they said that they would initiate that process right away. Yeah,
so that's correct, and that was my understanding. So I think if we can get an agreement today, I mean, we were obviously, the group of us on the call were speaking on behalf of the project. We still owe Jeff Wiseman that note, and so I was going to put it onto a memorandum and just get that signed. So that could be an action item, Madam Chair, that we could come out of here, that the committee agrees with that approach, that we wish them to start that process of decommissioning as soon as possible.
I think all the items that we mentioned prior, that Barry had in conversations with Jeff, was reconfirmed as well in terms of expanding that site, you know, going right out to the highway. He also mentioned something about a reclamation study, or if that actual area was contaminated, that they were going to look for something like that. But I'm not sure if that was on there or not.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. That's a good important point, and that's a note that I had asterisked, which is he does have a reclamation report, and he thought that there may be some information on the kinds of uses. I mean, as a wayside pit serving road construction, he you know, he was pretty upfront that there may be some things on that site that got chucked into the hole that need to be, that may be an issue, right? There may be significant issues. So if there is an environmental report, he will supply it to us because we will ask for it. We'll get the reclamation report. If there isn't anything, then, you know, we'll have to build into the process some level of environmental site assessment that's going to tell us. But bottom line is, and Cal, please weigh in here. In my simple non-designer's view of the world, if you've got contamination that is not a risk to transfer to the environment from where it's sat in the ground, if you did a slab on grade, you would be okay. But this building with the pool tank would not be slab on grade, would it?
And there was one of the conversations I think we talked about as well in that report, how much geotechnical investigation was done. Because I'm sure as they're removing gravels and extracting materials, a geotechnical engineer is involved in the process in terms of how to do that safely, and likely was involved in the reclamation process as well. So it's the environmental and geotechnical. I'm guessing if it was a gravel pit, contamination is unlikely unless they happen to bury a tank or some that kind of a thing. If it's pure extraction, it's probably not a, you know, environmentally contaminated kind of site. But if it's purely gravel, if we're lucky, it's good gravel and it'd be fabulous for drainage and bearing. But we would want to at some point confirm that geotechnically, even if it was just a geotechnical engineer looking at information provided by the ministry's report.
I think these would be the provisos coming out of any feasibility study that's produced. When we conclude on a site, it would be subject to necessary geotechnical due diligence, because that's going to affect footings and whether there's any extraordinary site development costs that we need to take into account.
Right. I'm also remembering the conversations around the access points in and out, right in, right out, perhaps at this end only? Do we want to keep both access points? This is certainly the most direct intersection. I have a bit of a preference right now, but without being too strong on it, would be to keep both at points of access, but maybe modify them. And I do remember the conversation around at some point sooner rather than later to have serious conversations with them. They would want some more developed site plan that really describes what we want to do. This is not it. This is not something we'd formally present to them. We'd want to do more development, but I think that has to wait until the preferred sites get shortlisted, and then we talk about how that should happen next. So that's
So
top of mind, but on the back burner.
so the the process is, as you know, we've focused on site issues whilst putting the other elements of our work program a little bit in the background, just because we know how important the site is in terms of its implications for capital costs and also functional space program. Even though we'll then develop a floor plans and other things from a number of other perspectives, what the land can carry is pretty critical. So so it will get developed to a greater degree, but from his perspective, or from the minister's perspective, I think what we're showing here is sufficient to get them addressing some of those questions. The other thing I should just bring everyone up to date on is that we've been dealing with RDOS in terms of getting some of their intel on servicing, and particularly sanitary servicing and so forth. And that information as of yesterday was still being promised to us, but I think we've pushed them to get us those layers, and that's something that for Cal's benefit we need to consider. This site, because it's kind of far from the madding crowd in the sense that it's outside of the urban areas. We do have to look at the how you would consider some of the implications of running a big volume water-based building in this location. And later in the process, what that means in terms of design and site servicing will be developed. We have a chap by the name of Jamie Lopez on the team that has not been relevant at this point, but he is a pool design and servicing specialist, and so he's going to weigh in to give us again a little bit of accuracy as to what the location, from the point of view of it being not an urban site, will mean for the design costs and operations.
John,
I can just,
can I just add something, John? Just
Yeah.
I'm looking at the intersection, and the road across the way that comes and meets the road coming out of the pool. Just so in the back of your mind, that piece of property on the other side of the road is going to be developed. And we're not sure, we're not sure how many houses or what's going to go in the head of the lake there, but all that traffic will be coming out there. So if it ends up only like 8 or 10 houses, not a big deal. But if it becomes a bigger design, that could be a problem for the highways. If you have a lot of cars coming from both ways, just to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah, thanks very much. And is there just a follow up then? Is there any kind of road layout or lotting plan fabric that you've seen that would be of relevance to us?
Nothing we've seen. We just had some designs come to council, what they want to do with that property, but nothing concrete yet.
can I just add there, Myers, that Martin and I are at a regional district meeting tomorrow, and this whole issue of the Willow Beach projects is coming to be looked at and voted on. So, but it's a rural vote. It does not have anything to do with those of us that are municipal directors. So it's still in the planning stages, but this, this is a place that we need to look at what's going in there first. And at this point, they have sewer hookups in there, There are some, not a lot, and there is no water to that site provided by the town, but there is fire protection.
Yeah, and the note we had from previous meetings, the meeting with Jeff, was that septic, yeah, up to the Willow Beach location, but boosters would be required to carry it across the highway, for example. So, yeah, there are some conversations we need to have, and we need to follow the process that you're following at both the RDOS and at the town level on this. Is there any sense of the timing, though, for this land to be brought on and built out?
Well, it's coming up to the regional district tomorrow, and I would assume that that will be talked about. We can't really be sure what's going to happen there because there are some pros and cons on it. Partly that that whole area there is in a floodplain, so
Yeah.
there are some tricky issues to deal with. But I would think maybe that's why the RDOS has not got back to you right away. Not sure. That I mean, it may not have anything to do with it, but that is a possibility because it's across the street. That
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. That may well actually be part of the issue, is that they're looking at these, the plans in terms of what
Mhm.
is currently there now and what might be in the future. So, and they don't want to give us anything that might be misleading. So, thanks for that note.
Can I just interject here? So the town does have plans to bring water as part of their water expansion to the rural area, to that area. So there will be municipal water brought to there at some point in time as part of the twinning projects. So there will be access to both municipal water and sewers to this site if in fact it's viable. So and I know that the Northwest Sewer has had issues relative to volume flows. So a volume flow from a facility like this may assist in the overall control of some of the problems it was having.
So just to be clear, the water only goes at the water twinning does not go to the north end of the lake yet. It is about 3 kilometers south, from what I understand. So they're doing the water twinning south right now in Area 9. But that part has not, we don't have any money for that part. So it hasn't even come up yet. It's not even.
But there are plans. The overall plan was to service the whole area.
And that is a kind of a long range plan. So things have had to sort of slow down a little bit there, but you're right. It's all being looked at right now, believe me.
Okay. Any other commentary on the meeting we had, or any questions you have regarding the meetings we had with the ministry? So our next step is to issue a note to them. And as I said, I think it would be good at the conclusion of this meeting, once we've talked about sites, just so we do this in an effective manner, to get perhaps and I think up to you, Gerald, and to you, Petra, in terms of how you want to, but one way is to have a motion from the committee here that we want to see this site progressed in terms of what the ministry and the Crown can do to free it up, and get a sense of timing for that as well.
And if I understood from your presentation, John, they did agree to already start with decommissioning at your meeting. They're just looking to formalize a request.
Yeah, they certainly did, and it was a very good meeting, and as Gerald says, the information that Barry had discussed with Jeff a few years ago was all reconfirmed. So yeah, it was very useful. They're waiting for us just to get back to them with a clear statement that we want to do that. I'm just suggesting we don't have to have anything formal here, Petra, but if it's a value that you think that the committee should just say yeah, so we would write on behalf of not only the consultant team but the committee. That would be that probably would help move things along. They're not always my experience, as much as we'd like to think that we're totally relevant, sometimes when you get letters from consultants, it doesn't always mean things move that quickly. So, but a committee might be a bit different.
Would it make more sense if we actually gone through the other items first and then got a statement?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we'd like to do. So the second item and the third items are really together. So when we met the last time, Cal ran through a number of different sites, and we had a general discussion, and to sort of give you a flavor of the opinion that was formed back then. We had an indication that a good range of sites. There were some errors in terms of where we dropped some of the sites, and so we've cleaned that up. We added a couple of sites, and Cal can go through what those additions were. And that was because we wanted to look at maybe some other sites along the highway and possibly private sites. And there was a consideration, I think it was from Barry, that maybe each of the project partners here, the two towns and OIB, maybe each come forward with a site. I think I kind of said, I think that the better approach is that we treat all sites as ones that anyone can take a view on, rather than have positions taken by the individual municipalities and the OIB, and that's run through a process. And so we had this longer list. I think we knew that some of them were there to make up the numbers, but we do want to have a process of looking at a longer list of sites. But rather than blow our brains out in terms of doing a lot of work on describing sites that we're only going to put to the back of the pile, and we don't want to take a lot of your time in making you do a lot of heavy lifting in consideration of sites, what we thought would be, let's clean up that list of sites. Let's give you a sense of what the evaluation criteria are that we would use for the shortlisted type of sites. And so we provided that document, and I can bring it up on screen if that's helpful. And then really just get everybody's opinion. Anybody who wants to speak, if you don't, it's fine as well. And we will take some notes, but just to get a qualitative assessment of which of these sites that we have are worth maybe taking forward. We know that the site that we've just spoken about, that Fruitvale, is kind of the leading candidate based on everything we know to date. But we probably want to have a couple of other sites that we could do some analysis on, so that we can answer questions in the public's eye as to the veracity of the chosen site. In other words, whatever site we end up with, if it's the one that we've been talking about, then it's going to be stronger, and the case will be stronger, particularly if there's extra costs involved in developing some of the land, or there's timing issues, or roadworks and things like that have to happen. It's better that we tackle those issues knowing that it's the best site by virtue of comparison with several others. So if you can follow my logic there, what we want to be able to do is scrub off, through discussion rather than through heavy analysis, scrub off sites that we can agree are not primary, have 3 or 4 at most that Cal and I can spend a little bit more time on, and go from there. So that's really the aim. And I appreciate that everyone got this package only the tail end of last week on a long weekend. So I'll put my hand up straight away and say not the best timing. But having said that, I think everyone is pretty familiar with these sites. So we're ready to take any opinions that you have on which sites might be worth looking at. And we did talk before, I'll say one more thing. We did talk before about recognition that, if you're dealing with lands which are not currently in your ownership, that is a relevant consideration, whether it be school board land or otherwise, lands which are in private ownership. So any observations are welcome. So Cal, maybe you want to start by just introducing those sites that we had added, And if you just tell me where to go, I can scroll through.
Secondary plan. Parks and-
I think it was a test orchard, was it not?
The test orchard one is one that for sure, and I think we corrected in Commute Corner. So hopefully we
did.
got that right.
Let's just go down there quickly.
Can I ask a question while you're scrolling?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why these documents, which are largely the same as what we saw a month ago, went from having nothing special on them to having confidential stamped across the top of each page?
No. I guess I wasn't aware that the materials that we had presented last time had actually been distributed, and if they had, that's fine. But on the assumption that they hadn't, I thought it useful just to put confidential on, simply because we're dealing with lands which are, some of which are privately owned, but nothing. There's no particular rationale behind it other than that. We just need to be a little bit careful. These are, I mean, I recognize this is a public forum, Petra, but we want to be very clear that this is a piece of analysis that's being done. We're not making any prescriptions about or the status of lands which would affect their values. So I'm always a bit careful in that regard. But yeah, it's just that we don't think at this point this stuff should be distributed widely, because not all of these sites are going to be thrown out into the public realm for consideration.
For sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it is a tricky balance of trying to be open and transparent, but also not be open and transparent with things that are just gonna cause more harm than good. But I think the meeting is being recorded today, and I believe it has been every other time, and it's available on our websites. And Lionel attended last time and was trying to get in this time, so they are out there and available to the public. I just wanted to double check that. Thank you.
So I think
It's my understanding. Can I
okay. Well, no,
just add
thank
one
you.
more
I mean,
thing?
if it's yeah.
Just the school board. I sit on the school board just as a town rep, but we're doing some stuff with the childcare in Soyuz, and maybe Gerald and Sue might want to reflect on this, but we're having a heck of a time with the school board trying to get them to, we have to move this child center over. They got a big grant, but we're trying to move it over on a little piece of school board property. And we spent thousands of dollars on lawyers, I think, to date. And we're just not getting anywhere. They don't seem to want to trade any land, sell any land. So when we're doing this, looking at saying, throwing this on a school district piece of property, I'm not so sure that would be an easy thing to do from what the dealings we've had with them. That's just a point.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're looking for, is recognition of these kinds of things.
Perfect. I see Councillor Mattis's hand up as well.
Thank you. Maybe I'm thinking of this wrong, but I look at the footprint that you show there, which doesn't meet the criteria that you've put in the report. In the report, it says that we need, if we were to go with a gymnasium, that we would need 196 parking stalls. The little picture there that you have up on the screen shows 70 parking stalls. So I think the critical, one of the first pieces we should have is a proper footprint of what are we building. Until we know what we're going to build, what do similar sized communities have? What are we looking at putting in? And that will define a footprint, and having a proper footprint may well determine which sites will work and which sites won't work. I'm not sure that picking a site is the first step in the process when we don't know what we're building. Until we know what we're building, we don't know where we can put it. So I think we need more work in the background before we start worrying about where we're going to put it. To me, what are we going to build? What's it going to cost? And then we worry about, okay, now that we can meet all of those criteria, where are we going to put it? Maybe I've got it backwards.
I can interject one of the things one is doing a broad study like this is coming up with a rough idea of the building size. And we're looking at various jurisdictions, and all of them have different parking requirements. And in the end, depending on where you are, like if we were to end up at the Oliver Recreation site, there's a bunch of parking, and you would go through a process to determine if that was a site, how much more additional parking would you need in terms of peak period demand. You might even have a parking study. So we're somewhat generic at this level, and some of the sites where we've put this kind of square of building with rectangular building with rectangular parking on various sites allows us to say, well, let's say Sun Bowl site, there is no room for a gym, hardly enough parking. So with a basic footprint, we can look at that site and say, boy, that's a tight fit, and then decide how valid that site would be right now. The trick is, from a design point of view, every site has its own constraints and restrictions and orientations and access points and site servicing. So we would want to not get too much into any kind of detailed design until we've at least narrowed down preferred sites, and then we can look at them. And then with further analysis would say that, you know, from a site servicing point, this one is preferable for these reasons. From a architectural prominence, this site is best. For a relationship to public transit, I mean, you have to, if you design too quickly.
I totally understand, but what I'm trying to say is all those criteria that you've referred to, if we analyze the 10 sites that we have, or all the choices that we have, 5 of them will drop off the list. They won't even come into consideration because they're not large enough, they're not serviceable, a whole bunch of, you know, they're private, we can't get at them, there's a whole bunch of reasons. So until you do that analysis, which I would assume is part of the feasibility study, then they will drop off, and we'll only look at the other 5 or the other 3 or whatever. You know, will come, the analysis will determine the proper site, but the analysis is based on what are you going to put on the site.
Mike?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, David, and I think part of this is process only. So beginning with the end in mind, we're looking for a regional facility. I think most of us know in our heads that some of those locations won't work. As municipalities and local governments, when we're going out to get information for our constituents, it's obviously important that we look at multiple options. We've done a lot of due diligence and shown that we've done that due diligence. So in my mind, you're right. A lot of these sites, in my mind, don't make any sense, but they have to be on that initial list. And then, you know, as we get more into the footprint, as we get more into public engagement, I assume a lot of those are going to drop off. And in our minds, as you know, in municipal leaders or administrative staff, we know our constituents are going to be looking at access, whether it's fair as far as proximity to the residents of each community. Those are going to be major factors, but I don't think those factors are really going to become prevalent until the public engagement stage. So I'm comfortable with this part of the process, having to put together an initial list and then knocking them off as we get to different points in this study.
Carol?
Thank you. And through the chair, Councillor Mattis and to Mike, I totally appreciate this conversation, because I think that what you are talking about is process, but I would agree with Councillor Mattis that if what we're saying is this is the basic footprint, but we would like the option to expand, that also has to be a part of this, because I would agree that there are easily 3 sites, 4 sites now on this list that we can't even look at, not just because of the size of the footprint that we've chosen at this particular moment, which, as Councillor Mattis's point, doesn't really meet even the requirements that we're saying we need for all of that space, wouldn't provide any space to expand if there was any other amenities we wanted to add to this site. But also because, you know, like, for example, the school district property here, like, taking people off the highway and taking them into a residential area probably isn't the best option for a regional facility. I think something off the highway makes a lot of sense. Something that's close to people coming in from, if you're coming in from air travel or whatever, and you want to be able to access that, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to be pulling people into residential areas. So I would agree that it's hard to go out with a big list. I think that we should be shortening this list in this conversation today based on not just the footprint size that we're working with, but also future expansion. Maybe that would be a safe way to go forward, because it is true. Like if you look at it as right now, if we're saying this is what we're building, we actually don't know what we're building yet. And so it is really difficult to completely choose a location. But I think you could eliminate a lot of things based on the fact that we know what we know right now.
Yeah, thanks, Carol, and everyone else. I agree with all of those comments. I think that's part of the process today, if I understood it correctly, is to get rid of the obvious ones that we need to get rid of. And to Councillor Mattis's point, if the footprint that we've been shown is not adequate for our basic needs, let alone expansion, then we need to be looking at. We need to be realistic with what it is that we're looking for, and make sure that we're only seriously considering any site that would really truly fit what it is that we want and need and allow for expansion. And so if there are, even if it's half of them, even if it's 75% of them that disappear because they're not going to work, then to do that, because there's not really any point in wasting much time on space that's not going to be usable. Gerald, did I see your hand go up?
Yep. I just want to remind everybody too, like the process of what we're doing has gone to 3 different municipalities and has been approved through our terms of reference. And what we're actually doing is a feasibility study for an aquatic center. And I know we've had discussions of, if we're going to add a gymnasium, a weight room, a daycare, and all that stuff, because that is part of the process. But I think first and foremost, it is the aquatic center, because that's what was actually agreed upon. And that's pretty clear in the terms of reference. So it kind of brings it together to that point.
I'm back. I apologize, internet. Just Cal, you might want to bring up the stuff. We'll be ready to bring it up rather than rely on me, because I seem to have a problem today in the office here. I got the tail end of the discussion, or the beginning of the discussion, I should say, about parking and whether the sites are big enough or not. Just for everyone's benefit, and I think you've probably been discussing this, in terms of getting site location, in an ideal world, you want the biggest site you possibly can, because then in the future, you're not constraining. The in situ expansion capability is really important. In an ideal world, you never build an aquatic center as a standalone aquatic center with nothing else attached to it. You would build gymnasiums, you would put field houses, you would put squash courts, you would put other community uses in there. You'd put arenas in there, because you're going to get the heat and cooling benefits of having those uses together. But one option, and we've just completed this in Fredericton, New Brunswick, which is one option, is to bolt it onto the side of something that exists. So we've got a couple of sites in here where we're putting it pretty close to some existing buildings. We recognize that the arenas are of an age that it's not a case of adding new to something that's pretty new as well. So what you'll see from us in terms of the language coming through the feasibility study is we're going to say the biggest, best site you can get is the way to go if you have plans in the future to develop more. If you want to create modular additions in the future, then you can do so. If you build in a constrained manner, that you're building to reduce your costs and to make a pool add on to an existing building perhaps. And so that will all come through into the mix. And then when you get to issues of parking, which are real concerns, they're all very relevant once you get down to the shortlisted sites. At this point, it really is about putting a general template against a general site and asking, does it fit from both an appropriateness perspective and also the capacity to build in the future, should you want to. But the terms of reference for the study, as Gerald says, is aquatics. And when we come back with capital costs, we will, and we're obliged to, come back with capital costs for an aquatics facility. Then we'll have a modular approach to what it would mean if you were to put some other use on it into the mix. And that's exactly what we did in Fredericton, because it is politically charged there. There's a city and then there's a region of users which are unincorporated in terms of their local service districts. They want to use the facility. Who's going to pay for what? So what you build in the facility, some want a cheap solution, some want a campus solution, which you can invest in the future. And we have to sort of navigate those issues, but that's exactly what I think we would do here as well. But at its core, it's aquatics. So Cal, you brought up the test orchard site.
I brought that one up just because we hadn't seen it before.
Yeah.
Lots of room for expansion. Back up one. That's it in a larger context.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's just to give you some indication of that. What we are looking for today is any commentary that, and we'll just sort of, recognize this as committee input, any commentary on, the 2 or 3 sites that you think would rise to the top, rather than sort of necessarily have to go through an exercise of telling us why sites don't work. Those sites which, from those various perspectives, aquatics only versus something that's going to be able to accommodate other things in the future, and therefore site size is important. Which of those sites would rise up that we could keep on the list?
So maybe because there's a lot of us here and it's hard to do these things over Zoom, I only can see 4 people at a time. So I'm scrolling back and forth trying to figure out who has their hand up. It might be a good idea if we just go through the list, and instead of knocking them off, maybe anybody that would be in their top 5 or top 6 puts their hand up or speaks up or whatever, and then we kind of tally at the end, or if anybody has any really specific comments about any of the sites.
Yeah, thanks. I think we're looking for, so you're looking for us to, let's get rid of the screen here, then we can see everybody. I think what you're saying, Petra, and then I'll.
No, that's fine. I'll keep scrolling back and forth, but if you can lead us through, one site at a time, starting with the district wine village, how many people think that might be an option, and kind of narrow it down that way. And
just for everyone's ease, I don't want to, this always, sometimes is difficult to do, as you suggest. What we're really looking for is kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, or maybe. And as long as it's a maybe, we'll keep it on the list. We may take, at the end of the day, this will be our analysis that will come back to you, and you'll actually see our reasons for what we've concluded. But we want to take on your views, whatever they may be. They could even be questions that allow us to go through that process. So Cal, if you go site by site, we can ask people whether it's thumbs up, thumbs down, or keep it on the table. But
and I'm thinking commentary like Miles mentioned about acquisition or relationships between certain bodies. If the district is apparently not that excited about shared facility agreements or however that is described, that's good to know. And we haven't done any work for the district, so I can't confirm that or not. So
yeah, so let's not get too detailed, because people's gut sense about these things. For example, that issue of dealing with another organization that is not a single person, right? That you can't go and buy the land from, that is an organization that has its own mandates, that typically can be an issue. So without getting into the details again, our evaluation categories are site characteristics, right? So that's ease of ownership, and that would fall into that category. Site configuration, which is what we've just talked about, is the site big enough? Extraordinary development costs, no one's going to know. That's something we can deal with for the couple of sites that we're going to be looking at. but regionality, right? Does the location, go back to first principles, does the location serve the primary populations, the primary trade area, the three partners here? Does it meet? So the location in terms of where it is in the region is important, and that's why that one site leads. And then planning objectives, there are objectives to develop. We just talked about one on the other, the Willow Beach area, for example. Potential for economic impact, potential for future growth. If you just think in terms of those types of criteria or categories of thought, which of these sites, which one, what do you think about each site? So yeah, Cal, just go through and then we can.
Sure, and looking at the time, just quickly, if people do want to make comments as we go, we probably have about 3 or 4 minutes per site.
That would be good. Thanks.
District Wine Village. Thumbs up, thumbs down, and maybe.
It's for me, it's a down. It's far too far away from Osoyoos.
Any other comments? If it's a thumbs up for you, just stick your thumb up. That's easy. It's a thumbs up for me. I think it's got the right space, probably some decent infrastructure.
Okay. Yeah,
Any
comments are good.
It would be a thumbs down for me because there's probably going to be some significant costs associated with developing that site for land costs and also for the distance in terms of being a regional facility. So that's just thumbs down for me.
We're 2-1 right now. Anybody else want to put a thumb up or a thumb down?
I'll say thumbs down for me, and it's not about cost or anything else. It's about location. It's not appropriate for Osoyoos, and I respect that. Cost of the land isn't a factor. That's another piece of the feasibility study is cost. So that shouldn't be a part of, maybe if we can't acquire it at all, then that becomes a problem. But the cost of it is really not an issue. That's a financial issue.
I would agree. Well, yeah.
Move down.
Okay, and I know we've got staff and ex officio members and all of that sort of thing, but I think everybody's opinion is valid and appreciated if you want to speak up.
Absolutely. All of this helps us because we just get, as David just indicated, one way to look at it is, yeah, cost might be an issue, but it's not relevant to this particular exercise. It comes in a little bit later on. So all of that is good. So if there's no other comments on this one,
I think cost of land is an issue when you're making a site comparison because some sites will have acquisition costs, some others may not. That's the only point I was trying to make.
Yeah, true enough. Either it's a zero cost or it's just a cost of opportunity if it's on public land, and if it's on private, it's a cost, correct? And so it is a relevant entry point of discussion here. The actual amount is not going to be known until later on, and if it's an institutional landowner like a school board, it's another level of discussion as well. But yeah, should we move to the next site?
Lions Park, north end of Oliver.
This one was a big fat no for me.
Down. I don't really know
Imagine.
much more. Honestly, it's just more like, as far as being on the highway, it's great. But I think that, removing one of the only community park spaces that exists in Oliver doesn't make any sense at this point in time, I don't think. Talk about a water table. Oh, have fun with that one.
I was gonna say, you're so you always find the silver lining, Carol. Like it didn't even occur to me to say that a positive is beside the highway. I just thought, no, bad idea.
Yeah, the amount of development that's gone into this location already, I think warrants looking at another location.
Yeah. So we look at it from
That's unanimous.
Yeah. So highest and best use, right? What's the highest? What's the best use in terms of the the fact that it's on public parkland. It's a brave decision to take someone's green space away, which is productive land use, whereas we have sites which are less productive. So yeah, I appreciate the comments. And if you just so remember, the audience for this is going to be everyone that needs to read the report and understand why we've come to a decision. And so we are looking for land holdings. And so some of them they might say, why on earth would you look at a public park? Well, because it's in public ownership and this is a recreational use and it is relevant. But we quickly screen it out. Okay, next one.
I would also say thumbs down to this one, not just because of the comments that have already been made about land ownership, but because I don't believe bringing people up into a residential area. There is so much issue with traffic control and other things already in this area that I think it will be very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. A traffic impact assessment on that.
It's a school, like it's just not,
I had similar thoughts about that one. Are there any other comments?
Is that town land or is that school land?
That's
School board.
Oh, well, there again.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to get any movement from the school board.
It's school, but it's also, it's school land. I mean, all of the things that Carol said, plus it's heavily used fields that are used for district-wide activities regularly and all of the reasons that it would be bad to take out green space.
Premier
Yeah,
sports field, yeah.
I think once we start looking at developing a site that's got the existing uses, all you're going to do is you're going to be beating your head against people because people are going to want that site to retain for its existing uses, and it's just going to make the whole situation a lot more difficult.
Yeah, that's a good comment, Barry.
Yeah.
One of the things to keep in mind for future is, even if you were to consider it, there's a field there. Do you even have the option of relocation or acquiring other property? Keep that in the back of the mind if you now. At least we will.
Yeah,
Not in that neighborhood, but good point.
Mike, you have your hand up.
Yeah, real quick. Unfortunately, I've got to run. I've got to get to another meeting. But as far as the thumbs up, thumbs down for me, I don't think it's any surprise. I've sort of said it from the beginning. There's only one site in my mind, I think, can move forward, and for no other reason than I believe it's reasonable and fair for all three communities as far as access. So in my mind, that's the location that would work. I know it's cart before the horse here, but I think 20 minutes into public engagement with the three municipalities will likely determine that any path forward would have to be fair and reasonable for access for all three communities. And there's really only one site that I think is obtainable that meets that criteria. So I just wanted to add that, and then I've unfortunately got to go.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
It's like,
Well said, Mike. You could save us a lot of time.
Well, listen, I appreciate that perspective, but you have to understand that, you have to be able to generate a site that's going to answer those questions of expandability and the cost associated with it, the extraordinary development costs, all for the sake of having something that is politically saleable because of its location relative to all three. So I fully understand that we're headed towards one site. Our job as consultants is to make the case in objective terms, not political terms, objective terms as to why that site is worth potentially the extra money that may be involved. That's why I'm taking your time in looking at it in this way. And once we get that site, once we get through and we say, okay, it's this site, then Cal and I are going to ignore other sites and start to work wholly on defining the cost and feasibility and timing issues related to that one site. So hopefully you can appreciate that.
on to Oliver Parks and Rec. I see Myers.
I agree with Mike. I think I looked at all these other sites and The only one I can see that might potentially would be maybe the test place, the test orchard in Soyuz, but again, it's in the Soyuz, you gotta go through town. It's on the other side of town, so I can go through all these, and say something about them all, but I have to agree with Mike. I think that's the only site out of all these ones that I see that fits the criteria of being between communities.
I like the fact of what John keeps talking about. If we don't actually investigate these other areas, I look at Desert Park and the Soyuz. It's property that's zoned for this. It's more than big enough. It's very usable, but the location sucks. Right? But if we didn't investigate it and people don't understand the process, because we're just here representing the people as a whole. And I think it is important to have at least one from each area along with the preferred site, if that preferred site is just based on location, because otherwise we might get a lot of kickback.
Just to build on your comments there, Gerald, I think that people in each community will be asking a question. Have you looked at why is this site in the center the best site? Why don't we have a site in our town or our community? So you have to be able to come up with the rationale that you've explored sites in your community, and this is why this site is better than the other site. And so I know the exercise is difficult, but we've got to be able to show that as a committee, we looked at more than just one site. And, I think there's a number of issues to address. Like I said before, one of the factors that, throws a site out is that both communities have very limited parkland. Eating up parkland, eating up an existing use for this facility is not going to make people happy. And there's going to be, a strong surge against that we have to overcome. So unless you have a site in the community that is a really good site that is not going to eat up existing uses, I think it's going to be a very difficult sell.
Yeah, agreed.
And Desert Park is a good site. That's what it said in the Recreation Master Plan. But again, it's eating up an existing use, and it's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
But it may be a positive to have it included.
Yeah.
I hear that, Barry. I'm interested if any of you have any opinions on this particular site that we're looking at right now.
I will
Anyone else?
to see the other option on the side too. This is for a.
Dave, thumbs down from Dave.
So
Anyone else?
Carol, is this is town-owned property, and it would eat into green space, valuable green space again, right? Or potential other amenities like the tennis courts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that the way that this configuration is right now, it definitely looks like that's exactly what would happen. I think it's important to recognize that there's an aging facility here already that will need repair or replacement. So from the community of Oliver's perspective, it would be an exciting opportunity on this location if it was reconfigured in a way that made sense. I can appreciate from the purpose of a regional facility that this would pose some challenges.
Yeah. If I could just add that if you just look at that picture there, you've got a range of uses that have been developed incrementally over time. Mm-hmm. They function. They're of great value to the local resident base. You've got an older facility though, and you're plopping a brand new facility onto this campus. It's not best practice. Best practice would be to raise some of these lands and start again with a composite multi-use community recreation complex, it's going to be very, very much more expensive. So that's the way that I think you rationalize. There are some advantages to it, but unless you're prepared to go in with a larger, more ambitious project, then it may not work.
I agree. But I think what's important to recognize is that if you are looking to move forward with a list of sites, if we're basically eliminating anything north of, Road 22, just because that way it wouldn't serve the need of a regional facility, then I think that's the messaging that goes forward. Because if the Oliver community is looking for a reason to say, well, why wouldn't we put it anywhere closer to us? Then the answer would be the same every time, because this is a regional facility and we want this facility to be accessible to not just the South Okanagan, but the boundary and all those areas as well. I think that ends up having to be your message, because if you were looking at an Oliver area other than the District Wine Village, this would be the only one that would have any type of feasibility whatsoever.
Right.
So, yeah.
And my comments were going to be similar to Carol's first comments. I think if the regional committee wanted to focus on a facility in Oliver, like a multi-use facility, that'd be awesome for Oliver. I mean, there's lots of old buildings there that could be incorporated into this whole big plan. And looking from above, you can see that there would somehow be the space to do it. But that's not maybe the best regional approach. Jim?
No.
Jim, you're on mute, maybe? I don't think you are, but we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, he's not on mute.
He's not on mute.
Oh, he is now. There he is. No.
Can't hear you.
Maybe we can jump to Sue while he sorts that out.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Dave. I didn't see Sue's hand up.
Oh, thanks. I'm just wondering if this particular site was one that was, in the mix, because there's so much parking there already. Would that mean that the parking that's associated with this site could be removed because there's already enough parking on site? Does that make sense, or do you still have to have site-specific parking for this building?
Well, I think we need to follow the prescriptions of the bylaw and common practice that the municipality has followed on this. But then it becomes, again, the bigger issue for me is that you're putting a brand new facility on a site because you own the site, because you can, but you've got this older facility that's going to have a limited lifespan to it, and you're not addressing it. So we've just had other projects where if you build something new in an existing site and you have something old on the existing site, you really constrain what you can do when you have to replace that older building. And so if this were a serious proposition, we would be looking at that. I mean, Cal, jump in. We would be looking at this and saying, okay, this is how you would, not exactly tabula rasa and get rid of go back to a blank canvas, but we'd be looking at what would you do to recreate this site in its entirety.
Yeah, we placed the building. This is option B. We had it over here. We moved it over here, but it could be right here in the future prominent location. Squeeze this building because it'll be gone, and put the nice new building up front or here. So there's a couple other things that one would look at. But I also wanted to comment on Sue's observation. In our experience, you do start manipulating your parking requirements when you have a big complex. You typically wouldn't just add them all together. You would rationalize and prove that you really don't need all the stalls you'd need for a facility in a mixed-use, multi-purpose place.
Yeah, the facility parking is often full without this facility being on the site. So we would need more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think what's important here is just to recognize that if we were talking about putting this new facility somewhere other than where you see buildings already, then I would say it's probably not a feasible plan. These are our premier sports facilities. We're just about to spend couple $100,000 upgrading our tennis courts and pickleball courts. And we already have an aging pool and an aging, hall gym facility. So like, I think if we weren't gonna sort of address that through this project, then I would recommend that potentially we're saying there isn't a site in Oliver that's feasible for a regional facility.
It becomes feasible if you remove the old pool and put the tennis courts there.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's part of the process.
I agree. Like we would have to be looking at this, not where you're dumping that footprint, I guess is what I'm saying, David. It's more like if we were to work with the site that's already there and replace buildings with new buildings, then I would say, yes, it would be feasible.
Yeah.
So my question would be, because I do think this is feasible. I don't think it's the best for a regional facility, but it would work on the site, taking into account everything that's just been talked about. So when we are narrowing down, and we're definitely taking more than 3 or 4 minutes per site, but when we're narrowing down and, really knocking off the obvious ones that are not going to work, but we want to be left with maybe 4 or 5 that are potentials, again, so that when we're having the community conversation, we can, most likely bring it back to a regional space that we all know is going to work. We have potentially the racetrack in Asuias, the test orchard, like some larger, not ideally located spaces in Asuias that would work for this facility. We have this one. Does it make it too complicated because it also includes then kind of removing what's there and starting fresh, so that we have enough places to talk about?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to take this back, and we'll be very cognizant that you have to have enough to talk about. But one way to address it is let the pictures do the talking for us. We've got a footprint there which has 2 tanks. It could be 3, and then you've got the gymnasium attached to it. If you said this site really only works in terms of just what to minimize the conflict with other uses, this is a site where you wouldn't build a gymnasium unless you were to do a comprehensive redevelopment. You could, however, squeeze in a pool. So Cal, you could just create a footprint where you're just showing the blue for the pool, and you could show that, yep, you could drop it in a location where you don't get in the way of some existing uses, and you probably would stay off the ball diamonds. You could make it work. It's still not great, and it still lends itself to being a bigger project than just a pool. But I think in the eyes of the public, for example, you can see that this site is really only big enough, if you're not trying to go in there and remove everything, it's really only big enough for the aquatics piece. Whereas those other sites that we've got in the mix here, if you wanted to develop them in the future for something else, you've got the expandability. And that's a big criterion that I think everyone should be looking at.
I like the concept, I think it was Barry, of we have a preferred site, but if we could pick a site in each community that's the best and do the next level of analysis, modified drawing, and you say, well, if we were to put it here, we looked a little deeper and said it should go here or there, and it should have these program elements or not. And then you get to the final stage and you make the decision, whatever it is. I think I know where it's going, but then you've got a process. You've got a defensible, rational, explainable process. So
you do, Cal. But I think this is where you've got to be careful that we don't start having the tail wag the dog on this. Is that we're looking at locations in order to get into a feasibility study that gives us enough information on the likely costs and the value of this project. And part of that value is what can you do in the future in terms of expandability, and what the operating costs are going to be, and what the cost share would be with each community. So we've got to recognize we need to develop a functional space program that everyone can agree with first. So before we come back and start doing an architectural exercise at the beginning, that's really important that we establish that functional space program. For everyone's benefit, this is a template, which is why I'm suggesting clearly you can see that the template of something which is more than just a pool does not work here. But
I guess in my mind, I'm struggling with this one a little bit, and I'm not even really totally sure how to verbalize it. But I think, sorry, phone beside me. we're in a process where we want to come out with the very best results in the end. And just given the conversations that we've had right now, I think we can all agree that shoving in a tiny little pool somewhere where there's not green space that's being used isn't like the best option. That if a facility were to go on this site, it would most likely involve removing existing buildings. So if we're going to look at this site as a potential, because it seems to be the only potential in Oliver, and again, I'm sure the community of Oliver would be very ecstatic if something like this happened. But to be true to the process, then, you know, when you go to the costing and that sort of thing, if we're looking at a multi-use facility, that means removing buildings that are there. That's part of the cost. That's part of the whole process to get us to the end, to a facility somewhere in the South Okanagan that benefits all of the residents of the South Okanagan in a somewhat equal fashion.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah,
So I think if we're going to look at this site, we don't just look at it as taking the little pool out of that drawing, take the corner out of it and overlay it somewhere, that we really want to truly be genuine in the way that we're doing it, because we really, in the end, want the best facility for the South Okanagan.
we do. All I'm suggesting, and I agree with you, we need to do apples to apples through all of this, and then say, well, the costs may go up on this site because of, as you described. But when we generate capital costs and when we've gone through the public consultation and we get a sense of people's tolerance for certain things, including site, there will be an option for just building a pool by itself versus building something which is more ambitious. And we'll get a sense of obviously the capital costs associated with that. And then there'll be discussions which follow. So, you know, once we understand that, people's tolerance on the capital costs. Building a pool is one thing. Building a pool plus is going to have a different cost associated with it.
Can I ask John and the committee about the idea of a second tier of test sites, like down to that preferred site and one in Osceola, one in Oliver, where we do a little more site-specific planning of just the core pool facilities?
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. I think we're just going around in circles. I think you got to pick one site, Oliver, one in Astoyas, and one we prefer. So when you present to the public, it makes sense, the pros and cons.
I know that's my thinking, like a planning design guy, but it might not be the right approach from Sierra financial making feasible decisions. Like I might be putting the cart ahead of the horse here, but that's I'm
well,
open.
look, the way I would answer that, Cal, is that I don't think so. I think the point that's just been made just prior to you speaking there is a good one as well. But I have to tell you is that what I really want to be, we started the location discussion because we know it's relevant, but allow us to take it in the right direction that's required as part of a broader feasibility study. And there will be choices about the scale of this facility and whether it be standalone or something that has other uses with it. And that will then return to, that'll be another lens on the location choice. But if you want to, just on the basis of aquatics, look at some of these more complicated sites at a next level of design in terms of, you know, site planning, I'm not opposed to doing that. But I would like to get on with the feasibility aspect of this, knowing that we have a preferred site. I think everyone's pretty much told us that there's a preferred site, and then we got to have a couple of other sites. So if your analysis helps us get to those other couple of sites to throw into the mix, one from each community, I'm not in opposition to that. Particularly as we survey the public at some point, we're going to be, you know, there will be questions about their preference for location, and the way you address that is you inform them with some of these options.
So John, that would be my question. You know, if we actually break it down and we had a preferred site from each community, and the site that we were talking about on the Fruitvale Way, What is the next, what's the next step? Like at what level would that come forward to the public? Or would it come forward to the public in a different realm where the choices that they would predict or support would be just the site? Would it be, you know, as a group, a set, or would it be just a specific site?
I think what you're asking is how would we address the outcome of having 3 sites for consideration with the public? And so one of the things we're going to do is an online survey of the public where we're going to ask about their preferences, their wants, their current use, where they travel to, all the usual stuff that we have to ask. And then we're going to say, what are the components that should go into an aquatic center? And we're going to be careful not to weigh into, do you want ice rinks attached to that or anything which is just well beyond our mandate? But we are going to ask, you know, what else should the building have? And then we'll introduce the sites and we'll say, you know, something to the effect of, there are a couple of sites under consideration, or 3 sites or so. And we'd ask, one way we can do it is to ask them to indicate their preference for each individual site. Now, I suspect what you're going to get is people from Oliver will say Oliver, people from Osoyoos will say Osoyoos, and then there'll be very few people that will say the preferred site. So I think there has to be some consideration of, the way I've done it in the past is we've asked people about willingness to travel, the importance of having a site that can be developed in the future versus a constrained site. And you do it in a way so we're not, we make it very understandable, but you don't necessarily back yourself into that referendum type question, which is this site or that site, because unless you know how to deal with the answers coming out of it, it can be a problem.
Sure.
I think, you know, on the location side, at the end of the day, there's going to be a report. There's going to be a consultant that has to justify its work to you and justify to the councils and band council, and has to justify to the public. And that's what we write reports for. There'll be discussion after this, but when that report comes in, it's going to indicate the merits of the chosen site, which other sites we looked at, what the public told us by way of their willingness to go here, there, or somewhere else. We're going to look at it from the point of view of good planning, because there's development going on, the towns are going to expand, and we're going to look at it from all of the perspectives of capital cost and operation and who runs it. Put that all into the mix, there'll be a recommendation from us. Do I think that the location question is going to get resolved in that report? Probably not, but you'll have enough information that I think every council can make some good choices from it. And the RDOS, because that's the other element that we want to be able to bring back up. This report is going to be of interest to them, even though they weren't funding this study. So
All right, so maybe we should just move on to the next site for now.
So any comments on it? I'll lead off a comment on this. I think we've got to keep this in the mix. I mean, that's it's a private site. It's big enough. That's the one, right, Cal? It's the one opposite the Canadian Tire. Hi, Cal.
It is the one opposite the Canadian Tire, and it is right on the highway. So my question would be how, because it was brought up before that we're dealing with some places that are private land. How do we deal with something like this that is private land, that they may or may not have any interest in selling or, you know, being involved in any way, shape, or form before things get too far down the road?
Yeah, we do not bring this into the short answer is we like the size of the site. We like its location. It's part of an area that is non-residential. It's more commercial. There we establish the value of it, but we would not bring this forward because we don't know who is owning whether or not the site could be sold. But it's part of setting the context for the entire discussion about location. Right at the end of the day, we want people to buy into the site that we suggest is best. And one of those criteria is access to the site, that you can get the site. This one we don't know. It's not within your scope or our scope to go and ask them for a price on this. But other than that, you know, other than the ownership, it's got some value. And again, we're just telling people that we have not simply chosen one site for lack of looking at other sites. So that would be the way I would approach it.
You could leave this one on.
Is that in agricultural land reserve?
I would have to check, but we will look into that as part of it. So, if you want to keep this on, happy to do so. The next thing we would do would be review some of the zoning on it. I mean, we've got, there's no reason why, because of the private ownership, you wouldn't say it's an okay site. We're just not going to do anything with it in terms of more detailed site planning.
John, the site of Kitty Corner to there, I think, Petra, that was for sale, right? That one over there. And I think there's a problem. They were going to do some commercial, and because it's in the LRIL, they couldn't get out of the.
That was years ago. The facility that's across the street, the Canadian Tire bylaw, that I think at the time that they were trying to put it in that Kitty Corner lot, and at the 11th hour, they couldn't get that parcel out of the ALR.
Thank you.
But I'm not sure about the corner one here.
Okay, so if there's no other comments on that one, let's move to site 7, Sonora Center. We dealt with 6. There's no need to go any further. Yeah.
Again, this is on the on school property. So this is on the lower field, and this is almost butts up towards the where the daycare is going to go. So I think that's probably something that we wouldn't actually investigate any further. When we did our initial study, the actual, like back in 07, it was on the opposite side of the building where we were looking at expanding, and it was along the fence line of the Sonora Center and the property to the school district.
This one, I think you could take off.
I think so, yeah.
You'd lose like the best toboggan hill in Asturias if you've had that one on there.
Right.
Yeah, the only one.
Okay. Site 8.
Sonora.
So this is Desert Park. This is definitely one where we had talked about in the past. And as Barry mentioned, it is in our community services master plan. There was a recommendation for this. This would work in terms of, the services are there, it's zoned properly. There's enough room to expand. It's all good with the exception, obviously, of location. As you see it here, it wouldn't interfere that much with any loss of green space. But you would get rid of all the barns and it probably wouldn't be a good fit there. And depending on what happens with the Desert Park Exhibition Society, that there's other stuff on the go with that as well. So
I think the site should stay.
How far, I can't remember how far off the highway this is.
Oh, God.
this is just, I'd say this is about 1.5 kilometers, maybe 2 kilometers.
No, it's not that far off the highway.
No, it's just up the road. It's just past the high school.
It's about
Yeah.
3 blocks.
Okay.
Well,
I'll let you know.
It's next to the golf course.
yeah, it's got to be a kilometer anyway
At
at
least.
the most.
Cool.
So Barry likes this one because he could walk to it from his house. So that would make it, he'd be swimming daily.
I think this is a good site, and I think we should keep it as well. I didn't even picture it at this area. I was picturing it somewhere else.
Oh.
Well,
On the
I
same
think
property?
Yeah.
I think the site itself has lots of options to handle the facility.
I agree. I think the site would be good, but just not the location.
Okay, leave it on.
Yeah.
Okay, so Cal, one thing you can look at is other locations on that site.
Okay, will do.
Okay, number
That
9.
one's a no, that's on the wrong side.
You still got this one wrong?
We've got other options, so we've left it.
Okay.
I'm not sure why we've left this one on. Sorry, not by me.
Yeah, and I mean, just listening to Mike, I don't think it's a feasible.
No, we've got this one.
Yeah.
We've got a couple others here, so. Got this one and we've got that one.
Oh, yeah.
My understanding is the OIB has got higher and better use of those lands planned.
Yeah,
And
that's what Mike's indicated.
Well, and it literally would be the furthest away
Yep.
from Oliver that you could possibly get.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you could take this off.
In the summer, it's shorter to drive to the facility in Penticton than it would be to drive to that
it
facility.
really would.
Really? Yeah, okay.
might be easier for me to drive to Penticton sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it would be
right.
great to welcome all the people from the boundary. Like that is going to be awesome if it's that
Yeah.
close. But you would eliminate. You're talking about that shared sort of. I think that would be people would be like, oh God, I don't want to drive right through downtown Osoyoos to get to
Yeah.
a regional facility. Yeah.
Exactly.
And this is why the public engagement piece of this has to be very carefully described in terms of the values of sites that don't lend themselves to having local residents pick something that's closest to them. You know, depending on who responds to the survey, this site would be identified strongly by some and completely rejected by others. So. Okay, site 10, Sun Bowl.
Again, I don't think there's enough room here to expand to do anything really.
No, this is one of those, you take the same template, plunk it on sites and you go, oh my God.
Yeah.
And even if you just restricted it to this would be a bolt-on aquatics facility added to the Sun Bowl arena. The arena is old enough that this is not a good proposition. You're putting new with old, and it's just not something you do. You put new with fairly new, and that's another way to do it. But this is that building just doesn't have that capacity. So I think again we've answered the question here by simply showing this on the site and by knowing what the status of the arena is itself.
There was a plan, there was a plan back in the 70s, right where the cursor is there now, but up on the property in the parking lot, where there was a swimming pool drafted, and it wasn't to scale, wasn't to size, and also those parcels of land right where you are there now, along the lower end, they were just sold not that long after I got here, but it was part of a development to do that as well.
Right. The only thing that would make sense is to acquire
Go ahead.
them. I was going to say, not relevant to our study, but if the town of Soyuz wants to look at acquiring those, that makes, otherwise this is not even big enough for an arena. Really, it's not.
And could I just add that there's also a curling club there as well, so and that's owned separately, so you'd have to deal with that. At one point, before the South Okanagan General was built, this was a consideration for the hospital. And then the fight was on. So it was.
And I was just going to add that in my mind, this site is much like the Oliver Parks and Rec site, that if we were to even consider it, the consideration would be getting rid of some of the existing infrastructure and basically combining it all and building new. But you can see how one is directly on top of the other, and there's not even space for that. There's not going to be space to put them side by side or anything of the sort.
You can just move on.
Thanks, Jim. That was subtle.
Test orchard site. We've addressed that one, have we not, Cal?
You want to leave that one in there?
I
Yeah,
would leave that one in there for sure.
yeah, absolutely.
Where is this one? I know it's Test Orchard. I just don't know where that is.
Next to the high school, adjacent to the high school, and sort of in between the high school and Desert Park.
Yeah, it's about 100 yards from Desert Park.
Oh, okay.
You can see the
It's
golf.
closer to the high school, actually.
Never noticed it. So you drive
can
past the
s-
high school.
You can see the golf course.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
photo.
I just couldn't figure out where on the road it was.
I'm really sorry, everybody. I have to go. I have another meeting I have to get to, but.
Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Carol. Have a good day.
So, Petra, I'll hand it back to you, but this has been helpful. I'm not sure everyone wanted to go through everything, but trust me, it's something that is absolutely essential. So having done it, I appreciate everyone's input. We don't need to come back to you with more of this kind of discussion. We're going to be moving on some of the other aspects of the work plan. So from my perspective, we've got what we need. We're going to generate that note to Jeff Wiseman at MOTI.
Yeah.
And I'll just ask, you don't need to do anything formal, but we would write that memo on behalf of the project team comprising ourselves as consultants representing the three partners. If that's good enough, we'll draft it and send it back through Gerald. I don't think the committee necessarily needs to take time to review that, but Gerald, I think we would send it to you and Mike and
Carol.
Maya.
Carol.
Yeah.
Can I just make a comment? There was, I guess, some conversation or hypothetical. This one you got showing, you could actually move it up closer to the highway and kind of close that other road.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know when you're talking if that's doable, but there was rumors you could actually close that road because they can come in from the other end.
Yeah, they spoke about that in cul-de-sacing. So then that's what Cal and I want to be able to do. It's clearly this is a site we need to spend a lot of time on, and so we'll start to generate some site layouts for that.
It is very doable and it doubles the size of the site.
Okay, so as far, thank you for all of that. A couple of questions for me. As far as having the committee send some sort of correspondence asking MOTI or whomever it is to start with the decommissioning of that site, I think that does, in my opinion, that does need to come through the committee if it's going to have committee endorsement. So I don't know if we have time to craft something today and get feedback from the committee, or if we can do that via email over the next little bit. And then my second question was just on our list of things to go over today, the site evaluation criteria. I didn't look close enough to see if that was already a revised list from what we got last time, but I'm wondering if you would like us to have a look at that even in our free time and get back to you with kind of what our top priorities are, or if that's already been done.
Well, I think, yeah, so we're sort of giving you sort of a window on the kitchen, best way to describe it in terms of our work. So, we don't want to slow down. We don't need approval on criteria. We're going to do our assessment. It's going to result in the preferred sites plus a couple of others for work. As I said, today has been helpful for us. If you wish to, and I appreciate anyone that wants to look at the evaluation criteria outside of this meeting and indicate what you think are the most important criteria, please feel free to do so. I think it's fairly evident, but we're happy to take any correspondence from people. And on the matter of sending a note to MOTI, can I suggest that I draft a memorandum and then push that through via Gerald to the committee, and then you could read that. And if there's an approval, just work through a process of getting everyone's nod in that regard.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, we don't want to slow it down, and we've all been a part of the conversation and are aware of what's being asked. So I think that, in my opinion, email response is probably appropriate.
Right. Okay. So let me get that memorandum drafted, and then go from there.
Great. Thank you. Then we have a round table. on our list of things to do today, but I think we've had a fairly good discussion. Were there any other questions or comments from anyone here? Anything
I have a
you want
question.
to test? Yeah, go ahead, Barry.
Just any update on the regional district and their recreation master plan process?
I actually had a meeting with the regional district. I just sat in on one of their planning sessions, and we actually invited the consultant to sit in on our community services advisory committee. I did bring up the aquatic center and the lack of involvement from the regional district, and it was received by them in full force. So they are aware, and it was a good conversation, that this is something that's in the works, and the amount of cooperation or the amount of involvement from all sides would definitely be appreciated, and that's about it. That's all I could say.
Okay, I just find it unusual that they'd be doing a recreation study when they're in recreation agreements and not having the partners involved.
Fair comment. Can we take down the screen, the shared screen? Thank you. Were there any other questions, comments?
I guess it would be one, Mary Mercordov mentioned about meeting the RDOS tomorrow, so maybe there will be some updated information with the two mayors attending the RDOS tomorrow.
This issue is not on the agenda tomorrow. I do have the agenda, but it's not something that was being brought up.
The development at the north end of the lake?
That is, but not the Parks Master Plan, not that one. But absolutely, that development up there is on the agenda tomorrow. Yeah.
I know the town of Oliver's been part too, so they're fully aware. I know Carol's been involved, and she was part of that meeting that we had as well. So.
Okay. Thank you. So the only homework we have between now and the next meeting, I believe, is that we'll have that document circulated to us by Gerald. And if everybody could respond via email, that would be appreciated. And if there are no other questions or comments, then I believe we're done. And our next meeting is August 4th.
Yeah.
Same bat time, same bat place.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Petra.
Yeah, have a good July.